Pay close attention. What you're about to see is Bible prophecy being fulfilled.
Welcome to another edition of YPN News, bringing you the news as it relates to Bible prophecy and foretold by Yeshua Hawkins. We're going to start off our broadcast today with a respiratory virus that has been spreading rapidly over the past few months, causing hundreds of children to be hospitalized. This particular virus is called Enterovirus D-68 and has been reported mostly in the Midwest and southeast parts of the United States. Now, there are dozens and dozens of enteroviruses, but there's something about D-68 that makes it worse. This particular enterovirus has much more severe symptoms, often landing people in the hospital. Now, at Mercy Hospital in Kansas City, Missouri, more than 400 children were hospitalized with signs of this virus, with 60 of those children ending up in intensive care. And here's the important part, all in less than a month. Well, pediatricians at Mercy Hospital say they've never seen anything like it and don't know why it's gotten so bad this year. Enterovirus has spread person to person, and the recent start of school in mid-August was the same time these cases of D-68 started. Now, this respiratory virus has the potential to cause anyone to be sick, but a child with asthma or a history of asthma is much more at risk. Well, from one scary virus to the next, the West African Ebola virus is spiraling out of control, but health officials say they know how to stop it. So why isn't the Ebola virus being contained? Well, for every Ebola patient, healthcare workers are supposed to keep track of every single person who's had close contact with them. If one of those contacts gets sick, they're supposed to be isolated. Then all of their contacts are followed until there are no more sick patients. So what's the problem? Well, in many parts of West Africa, contact tracing is not working. Parts of West Africa have streets with no names. People have no addresses, meaning that some contacts are never found. And just one missed contact can spread Ebola to other contacts, which will also be missed. Now, the CDC reports that even one missed contact can keep the outbreak going. All of this is beginning to add up and has the World Health Organization really concerned. Well, for the past few months, we've been following the moves of ISIS, or the Islamic State of Iraq. And at the end of this broadcast, we'll talk about how this group got started. But this week, Vice President Joe Biden had some very strong words for ISIS. Let's take a look.
As a nation, we're united. And when people harm Americans, we don't retreat. We don't forget. We take care of those who are grieving. And when that's finished, they should know we will follow them to the gates of hell until they are brought to justice. Because hell is where they will reside. Hell is where they will reside.
President Obama and America's closest military allies held crucial talks this week. The NATO leaders are considering forming a joint plan to fight the terror group ISIS and are discussing a response to Russia's aggressive moves in eastern Ukraine. The formal NATO agenda is all about closing the war in Afghanistan and boosting defense budgets for NATO member nations. Now, President Obama has been meeting with Ukraine President Petro Poroshenko and the leaders from Great Britain, Germany, France, and Italy. Now, these talks were to focus entirely on the Ukraine issue. However, President Obama will use the opportunity to lobby European leaders for more help against ISIS. President Obama and British Prime Minister David Cameron, writing in the Times of London, said neither nation would be cowed by the brutality of Islamic State forces, also known as ISIL. Now, they urged other NATO nations to join the fight. They continued, When the threats of our security increasingly emanate from outside NATO's borders, we must build more partnerships with others who share our values and want a tolerant and peaceful world, the leaders wrote. Now, they continued, that includes supporting the partners who are taking the fight to ISIL on the ground, as we have done by stepping up support for Kurdish and Iraqi security forces. Now, in addition to meetings with the European leaders, President Obama will also have a meeting with King Abdullah of Jordan, a key U.S. ally in the Middle East, now also threatened by ISIS. Well, despite the talks, American officials believe they're free to use airstrikes against ISIS. However, not everyone in the global community is of the same opinion. Now, YPN's Larry McGee has a report on the other side of the story. Larry, who are some of the players disagreeing with America's position?
As one of the key players among the evil powers which the papacy says is forming, Russia, Jeff, is one of the biggest opponents of America's intentions at this time. In a report recently released by the Russian Ministry of Foreign Affairs, Russian officials stated that the U.S. strikes against Islamic State in Syria without a UN mandate would constitute an act of aggression and a violation of international law. According to the Russian position, the attacks would further inflame the conflict in the Middle East. And there is also concern that with the classic oops excuse, the prolonged strikes might be further utilized to target Syrian government forces as well. Moscow maintains that any strikes within Syria should be approved by Syrians.
Now, Larry, Moscow is aligned with China, but what has the Syrian response been to all of this, and what has America's reply been?
Syrian officials say any attack within their borders will be considered an act of aggression. But America's position, voiced by Secretary of State John Kerry from Saudi Arabia this week, is the government of Iraq has invited the United States of America and asked for help from the U.S. as well as several of its neighbors. And according to international law, when a country is invaded and invites someone in to help, then a country has every right in the world to respond to that request. The problem is that America was invited by the Iraqis and not the Syrians, where America also intends to strike. While the position of the war hawks and the American government seems to be settled, the opinion of the American citizens seems to be divided. Some believe we should confront terrorists wherever they are, but tired of the chaos and fighting, there is another voice growing among Americans which is saying no to war and feels we shouldn't be dropping bombs on any nation, period. For YPN News, I'm Larry McGee. Jeff, back to you.
We appreciate your report, Larry. Well, on the topic of Syria, the new United Nations envoy to Syria recently paid them a visit with hopes to end the crisis that has claimed around 200,000 lives since 2011. The UN officials met with the Syrian president, along with other Syrian officials and the internal opposition, in a bid to restore the stalled political process that has seen little change over the past year. Iran's ambassador to Syria said, "We continue to support the work of the United Nations to reach a political solution." Now, as this visit was taking place, the attention of the people shifted from the visit to the attacks on ISIL in Syria that President Obama promised in his recent speech. Well, Mohammed Ahmed, political commentator, said Western and Arab aid to the Syrian insurgents helped ISIL grow and become stronger, and now they say they want to fight it without cooperating with the Syrian government, nor with the Iranians or Russians. And I find that hard to accomplish. Eventually, they will re-enter the Middle East under this pretext. Now, the Syrian Foreign Minister, Walid Muallim, has warned that any airstrikes on Syrian territory by the U.S. without Damascus' consent would be considered an act of aggression. Well, lastly for today, we're going to talk about the group ISIS, or ISIL, or Islamic State, or whatever this newly terrifying terrorist faction is called. Now, since we first heard of ISIS, small news outlets have been claiming that the U.S. made them. Others, besides conspiracy theorists like the Washington Post, have also arrived at the conclusion that the U.S. both trained and armed ISIS. Now, in the article, the Post outlines just exactly how this was done. For decades now, the U.S. has been acting on the old premise, the enemy of my enemy is my friend. So the U.S. arms and funds groups in the Middle East, hoping those groups will be able to beat other groups and thus defeat a mutual enemy. However, with years of intervention and short-term alliances by the whole world, not just the U.S., knowing who thine enemy is next to impossible. Now, the article lays out very clearly just a few of the ways the U.S. is responsible for ISIS. It starts by pointing out how the U.S. trained Syrian rebels, a fact substantiated over the last few months by The Guardian, Reuters, and a million others. Now, one high-level security commander of ISIS who spoke with the Post said that all those U.S. trained Syrian rebels have now joined ISIS. And as far as the U.S. arming ISIS, well, the article explains that when the Iraqi army flees from ISIS, they leave all that military equipment and weaponry that the U.S. gave them behind. Thus, ISIS's arsenal continues to grow. Now, the U.S. has dumped billions of dollars in weapons, training, and supplies into the Middle East that ISIS now has so much money and weaponry, it rivals Israel for being the most capable military power in the region. So you don't have to be a conspiracy theorist to know that at least some of the U.S.'s massive training and funding in the Middle East has gone directly to ISIS. No matter what you call this latest terrorist group, they were primarily made in the U.S.A. Well, while the world watches life-threatening disease epidemics and ongoing warfare steadily increase in the Middle East, there is still a message of hope being taught. Only one place is showing a way to bring health back to mankind and how to stop all wars. The House of Yahweh is that place, and Yisrael Hawkins is the last day's witness teaching at that place. Contact the House of Yahweh today and request your free Prophetic Word magazine and monthly newsletter. Here's how. To contact them, you can write the House of Yahweh at The House of Yahweh, P.O. Box 2498, Abilene, Texas 79604. You can call them at 1-800-613-9494. Visit them on any of their websites, www.yahweh.com, www.yisraelhawkins.com, or www.yahwehsbranch.com. You can also email them at info@yahweh.com. And for any calls outside the United States, please call the number on your screen. Well, don't go anywhere. Up next is Yisrael Hawkins, teaching the only true way to salvation. From all of us here at YPN News, I'm Jeffrey Heimerman. Thanks for watching.